If you've ever spent hours making a handmade card just for it to look flat, kind of basic, or not at all like what you pictured in your head, you're not alone. Most beginners and honestly even experienced card makers struggle with getting their cards to look polished, professional, and intentional instead of homemade in the wrong way. By the end of this video, you're going to know 14 simple but genius DIY card making hacks that instantly level up your cards, whether you're just getting started or trying to make your work look really high-end. These are the kinds of small changes that take your cards from beginner to pro without buying expensive tools or starting over from scratch. Let's dive in. Let's start with a couple of die hacks, and this first one is fantastic for stretching the use of the expensive dies we all have in our stash. You can use this one die in so many ways. Of course, you can use it as a regular die, which is its standard use, but I'll show you how you can also use it to emboss and color an image. This hack really helps you maximize your supplies, but before I get started, the first thing to keep in mind is this. Anytime I emboss, I always spritz my cardstock lightly with water. That's exactly what I'll do here, and I'll also show you the difference between embossing with heavier and lighter weight cardstock. Both work beautifully, but I feel the heavier weight one looks slightly more dimensional. I'll be using my Spellbinders machine for this. I don't need the cutting plates, but what I do need is the rubber mat that comes with the machine, along with adapter plate D. If you're using a different brand of die cutting machine, I strongly encourage you to check your user manual. Look for the recommended embossing sandwich required when using a die or a cut shape. Every machine is a little different. Before I proceed, I need to clean this mat thoroughly. It's covered in remnants of my past crafty misadventures, and honestly, it looks like it's been through a tiny tornado, right? But I'll get it under control with a misting of water and a rag. I like to go over it again with a Swiffer just to make sure static hasn't outsmarted me, especially during the winter months. Now for the sandwich. For Spellbinders, I'll need platform A, platform B, and then rubber mat E. Next comes the cardstock, and before placing it down, I'm going to spritz the cardstock with water. Trying not to go overboard here, though knowing me, I'll either create a tiny mist or a full-on Niagara Falls. Actually, that wasn't too bad. This is going to be my card panel, so I'll position the die exactly where I want the embossing. Once it's placed, adapter plate D goes on top, and then I'll run it through the machine. This is the moment of truth. Look at how beautiful that embossing is. Even though this is lightweight cardstock, it didn't crack at all because I first sprayed it with water. Let me show you the difference with heavyweight cardstock as well. This heavyweight cardstock is Nina Solar Crest. I'll spritz it the same way. One important thing to note, do not tape your die down to moisten cardstock. I've tried every low-tack tape I own, starting with Spellbinders Best Ever Craft Tape. I used washi tape, painter's tape, pixie tape, but every single one ripped the paper. I strongly recommend avoiding tape altogether. This cardstock embossed really well too. The heavier weight actually gives a slightly deeper and puffier emboss, but honestly, both lightweight and heavyweight cardstock work beautifully as long as you add moisture first. You'll notice the top and reverse sides of the embossing are both very pretty, so keep that in mind when designing your card. Wait until you see how this design transforms in the next hack. I want to color the embossed image, and since I don't have the coordinating stencil, and even if one exists, I don't own it, but that won't deter me because I'll make my own. I want to mention here that some of my viewers have suggested using acetate in one of my earlier hack videos, which you can absolutely do. Or you can use a fused laminator sheet as an acetate. I've tried using acetate, but it just doesn't work for me because I only have thick, high-quality acetate from Salmon Says Stamp, and it's very difficult to cut intricate designs with it. I ended up wasting acetate every time, but if you have lighter weight acetate or Mylar, please use that by all means. I'm using clear packing tape for this, and it's also way cheaper as well. When you create a stencil with packing tape, it becomes waterproof, which means you can reuse it over and over again without the paper breaking down from the ink. If you use plain cardstock for a stencil, it will have a limited lifespan because the ink eventually destroys the paper. Packing tape solves that problem. I tape the cardstock down as carefully as I can, and you can see here that I have all the grace of a drunk elephant on ice skates. Laura B., if you're watching, I just stole your analogy. It was just so apt for my current predicament. Clearly, coordination and I are having a very serious disagreement today. I'm sure you'll manage to avoid air bubbles way better than I'm doing right now. This was an unmitigated disaster, but hey, we'll keep calm and carry on. Once it's die cut, it won't even matter because it'll still function perfectly as a stencil, and I can just pretend that none of this ever happened. I'll also pretend I'm not overlapping the tape because overlapping creates thicker layers and the die won't cut properly. Ask me how I know. I'll place each strip of tape as close as possible without actually overlapping, and even if there's a small gap between the tapes, it won't ruin anything. Once the tape is in place, I'll trim off any overhanging bits. I don't want adhesive going into my die cutting machine, and I also use a dedicated pair of scissors for sticky stuff. This bit here is folding up, so I'll just trim that bit off, and if it doesn't work, I'll just have to make another panel. That's it. Now, I'll use the sandwich recommended for regular die cutting, and I'm making sure the die is sitting on the part with the tape because that's what we want. I'll also add a scrap piece of watercolor paper as a shim to increase pressure. This reduces the number of passes needed through the machine. I'll run it through once, then roll it back. The second pass usually finishes the job. The inner areas sometimes don't cut properly, but if that happens, I can fix it manually. I'll hold on to both the positive and negative pieces. This is really important for later. I'll just remove the die cut pieces using my pokey tool, and I'll hold on to the flower centers as well, and I'll show you why in just a second. As I'd expected, the areas where the tape was wrinkled didn't cut perfectly, but that's easy to fix with my craft knife. By the way, I should be using a cutting mat instead of doing this directly on my glass mat. I'm just being lazy here, but it should be fine since I'm not applying too much pressure. Now for the fun part after all that elbow grease. I'm using my Altenew sticky mat to hold down my embossed panel, and I'll place the flower stencil over the embossed design. It should click into place fairly easily. Now that the stencil is stuck down on the sticky mat, I'll reinsert the larger negative piece and the flower centers and use them as masks, which helps keep ink out of areas I don't want it. I'll place a magnet over this, and honestly, this is why I love my magnetic glass mat. It holds everything in place and frees up my hands. I highly recommend a glass mat if you don't have one yet. This is the smaller one from Salmon Says Stamp, in case you're curious. And if you're looking for the list of supplies, you'll find affiliate links in my blog post that I've linked in the video description. It would help me out a lot if you use the links in case you decide to purchase any of these supplies. Of course, they won't cost you anything extra, but it will definitely help out my channel. Thank you so much if you decide to support me. I'm concerned about getting the ink on the card base, so I'll cover the edge with a post-it note for safety. I'll gently clean the stencil by dabbing it with a damp rag. I never rub because it's too delicate, and I do want to extend the life of this stencil beyond this one use. And this is done. This die has now been used to die cut, emboss, and create a reusable stencil. Once the ink dries, it smooths out naturally. And depending on the die you use, you can obviously just stencil without embossing at all. I store my stencils in a DIY folder I made using my laminator. If you've seen my laminator hacks video, this might look familiar. I'll link the video in the description. I'll save both the positive and negative pieces, securing them with tape, and store them in the folder. This next hack is one you'll absolutely love playing with, and the possibilities are endless. Keep watching. If you have background stencils sitting in your stash, you should bust them out and make embossed backgrounds with them. While the embossing won't be as defined as when it's done with an embossing folder or with a die as you just saw, it'll still create a beautiful subtle texture. I'll start by spritzing the card panel with water as I normally do when embossing. I'll again ensure the rubber mat is clean before placing the cardstock on it. I'm using a 6x6 background stencil for this hack, and I'll use the same sandwiches I did when I embossed with the die, but this time I'll use a shim for added pressure. I'm using Neenah Classic Crest for this project since it's a thicker cardstock. A thin stencil can't apply much pressure compared to a die or an embossing folder, so I prefer a thicker cardstock, but lightweight will also work with one or more shims. Just try out a few variations to see what works with your supplies. Look at how lovely this turned out. Although it is a lot more subtle if you compare it to the earlier daisy one, but this is such a wonderful way to add a light texture to your card backgrounds. You can use this as it is, but I can also do some ink blending to create a second option for this embossed background. I'll use some distress oxides here, peacock feathers, milled lavender, and spun sugar. The ink blending is done and it's looking lovely. But I'll show you another hack that will extend the use of your stencils as well. I'm using the panel I just created, and after cleaning my stencil, I'll reposition it over the panel, but this time I'll shift the stencil slightly to expose the gaps in the stencil pattern on the background, and I'll fill those gaps in to create a different effect. It'll make sense as soon as you watch me do it. I'm using Lost Shadow Distress Oxide for this, and I could even use the same 3 colors I used for the first iteration. See how it created a whole new pattern. This hack works best with geometric patterns, but you could definitely play around and see how else you can use other patterns. Maybe try flipping the stencils vertically or horizontally to create a mirror image. I think it's a fun little way to get more bang for your buck. I want to show you how to perfectly align and stamp narrow sentiments, especially when working with label dies or solid dies where you can't see through the center. For example, I'm using one of these label dies. I also want to use a very narrow strip sentiment that says happy birthday. Because the sentiment is so narrow, alignment is critical. This die is even more difficult to work with since it's a solid die and you can't see through it to position it over a stamped sentiment. With other dies, if you stamp first and then die cut, the sentiment may not be perfectly centered, but with this die, it's absolutely impossible. This method solves problems created with any types of dies. First, I'll die cut the label and save the negative piece as well. You will need a stamp positioner for this to work. I'm using my MISTI to set up the stamping jig for this. I'll place a piece of scrap craft cardstock inside the MISTI, but a white scrap might be a better option for visibility if you like. Then I'll place the negative die cut, securing it with my magnet, but you could also use a bit of temporary glue to hold it in place. Positioning this template isn't really that critical here, but there's another way of doing this, and that is to first stamp the impression on the scrap craft panel and then align the template around the stamped impression. Either works well, and I use both methods. I do demo the other option in my earlier hack videos. Anyway, for this, I'll center the stamp within the rectangle, and I'll use an acetate sheet to fine-tune the placement. This is a fantastic alignment trick I learned from Gina K. It saved me so much grief and frustration, and most importantly, waste. I'll add a little temp glue to the background and insert the label so I can test the placement on the acetate. And after fighting with the template, I finally decided to secure it with some temporary glue so it doesn't shift while stamping. I should have done it at the outset anyway. I can see the stamp isn't perfectly centered, so I can reposition it. Now that everything looks good, I'll remove the acetate and stamp directly onto the label. This cardstock is really lightweight, so it kind of curled up a little when I pulled it out, but that will get fixed when I stack up a couple more blank labels behind it. I'll gently remove the temporary glue residue from behind the label using my glue eraser, although I really don't need to since I'll add more layers behind it. But I wanted to show you how I remove adhesive with my glue eraser. Now I have a perfectly centered sentiment, and this small thing alone can really give your cards a professional upgrade. This is such a reliable method, especially for narrow banners and sentiments. And also, this is the best way to batch create sentiments or other designs since the jig is all set up anyway and ready for use. Just cut out multiple designs or labels, place them into the template and stamp. If you love making fun fold cards, the next hack will be a game changer. I want to show you how to score from corner to corner, which can open up a world of possibilities when creating fun folds. You can absolutely do this with a scoring board, and I demonstrate that method in an earlier hack video as well as in my recent fun fold cards video. However, if you're making a larger fun fold card like I'm doing here, my scoring board doesn't quite accommodate the entire panel. But I want to show you an alternate method using a wire trimmer, which makes it incredibly easy. First thing is to make sure the cutting blade is completely out of the way. I'll use the wire guide to line up the two opposite corners of the card panel so they sit perfectly along the wire. I'm using a stylus for this, but a regular bone folder will work just as fine. Once the corners are aligned, gently move the wire guide out of the way while keeping the cardstock in position. Then run your stylus or bone folder directly along the groove where the wire was. This gives you a perfect corner-to-corner score line. Because this cardstock is thick, I'll flip it over and score again from the opposite side to make folding easier. Now I can fold along the score line very cleanly. This creates a corner fold easel card, and here is the finished card I made using that fun fold. It folds up neatly and stands beautifully. I think diagonal scoring can be so much fun. Let's move on to another hack which has saved me many an intricate die cut while trying to release it from its negative piece. I'll show you how I do that without tearing or distorting them completely out of shape. I have a die that cuts multiple frames at once. As you can see, these frames are really thin and delicate. Now I'll hold the negative piece and pull gently. Please wish me luck. This is where my patience is tested, and my clumsy fingers may or may not sabotage me just because I'm on camera. But if I mess up, I'll just claim it's a modern abstract design. Jokes aside, what I'll do is hold on to the positive piece firmly and gently pull away the negative piece. This prevents the delicate die cuts from bending or tearing. Even if the negative piece tears, it doesn't matter. Since most of these are usable frames, there aren't many negative pieces to use as levers, but this method will work like a charm and protect the shape of the die cuts. For extremely intricate dies, pulling the negative piece away is the safest method. Once the negative is removed, the remaining frames are easy to separate. This is especially helpful for beginners as intricate dies can be frustrating when you're starting out. I have been able to release all the frames here without damaging a single one, no matter how delicate they are. Now, if you're like me and struggle with cutting straight edges, the next hack is for you. Alright, so for this hack, it's going to feel a little silly, mostly because I'm using scrap paper here. I don't have an active project on the go right now, and this was honestly the easiest way to demonstrate the idea. This hack is all about what happens when we stick layers together and end up with overhanging edges, especially longer edges, not just tiny bits. Most of the time, we instinctively grab a pair of scissors and trim off the excess. Now, technically, that's perfect, but I've learned the hard way that my scissor skills are, shall we say, deeply questionable. So instead, I prefer to use my paper trimmer, and I've found a way to trim off that excess cardstock without accidentally cutting into the actual card panel. To demonstrate, I've adhered 2 pieces of scrap cardstock together. I have overhanging bits on both sides. First, I'll use a pair of scissors and I'll trim the excess as closely as I possibly can, but you'll notice there's still a little bit of white showing. If I try to get any closer, I can actually feel that I'm about to cut into the craft cardstock. Now, let me show you the trimmer method. I'm going to line up the edge of the craft cardstock with the cutting blade. I'll gently bring the cutting arm down, very gently, and I can feel a lot of resistance. That tells me I'm hitting 2 layers, which means I need to shift the cardstock just a hair. I move it slightly and try again. And now it goes down like butter. No resistance at all. And just like that, I get a perfectly clean, straight edge. Let's do that one more time. Again, I line up the craft cardstock with the cutting blade, bringing the arm down slowly and gently, and I feel no resistance, which means I'm good. And there we go, another clean edge. Let me hold this up against the lighter paper so you can see it clearly. Completely straight, no white showing, no uneven edges, compared to the scissor cut edge, which in person definitely has a bit of unevenness. This is a much cleaner result. So that's an easy, reliable way to get perfectly straight edges when you're trimming off overhanging layers. Now let's talk about cutting fishtail banners. I'll trim the sentiment strip to size first, aligning the stamp text with the see-through finger guard so the margins are even. This is a hack I learned from Kathy Zilski, but this isn't the hack I want to demo here. I'll keep a little more room on the right side since I want to create the fishtail there. Next, I'll lightly mark the center point with a pencil. I prefer to avoid using the tip of my scissors because I find it doesn't give me enough force to cut through the paper. So I'll move the blades up a bit and make a snip up to the pencil mark. I then cut from one corner to the center mark. Now I'll be careful here and save this piece since I'll reuse it to ensure I get the exact same angle on both sides. I'll take this piece and line it up with the banner's straight edge, just like this. I'll make sure everything is lined up properly and hold the little piece firmly in place. Now, because I already have the angle on this side, this acts as a perfect guide. I'll hold this firmly in place and cut straight up, right to the pencil mark. There we go. And as you can see, I now have a perfect fishtail. I'll remove the pencil mark with an eraser, and if there are any little paper fibers along the edge, I'll just clean those up as well. And there we are, a perfectly symmetrical fishtail banner. And you can use the same method to create angled banners as well. If you love creating card layouts with pattern paper, you'll love this hack that uses temporary glue to plan your design. I'm working with a 5x7 card base and lightweight layering cardstock. Using temporary glue allows me to move pieces around freely while I experiment with placement and layout. I'll start by positioning the sentiment label where I want it, since that's my focal point. When paper piecing like this, I always start with the corner pieces. This helps maintain even margins. Once I'm happy with the layout, I use liquid glue and adhere one corner at a time, adjusting as needed before the glue fully sets. Temporary glue combined with liquid glue makes adjustment a breeze and helps prevent mishaps that lead to frustration and often wasted card panels. By the way, before moving on to the next hack, I want to take a second to give my friend Michelle a big shout out for this beautiful holiday card I received from her. I love the striking simplicity of this design, and the ink blended night sky is just stunning. Thank you for your thoughts, Michelle, and your constant encouragement and support mean the world to me. Now for another delicate die cut gluing hack. When working with very thin word dies like this one, it's important to run the die through the machine twice, forward and backward, without removing the sandwich. This ensures a clean cut. Some dies don't cut through completely since they're very intricate, and trying to reposition the die to pass it through the machine a second time might not work, since the die might shift during repositioning. Once cut, I like to cover my work surface with a nonstick sheet to prevent the die cut from getting stuck. It also protects the work surface from getting sticky. Instead of applying glue all over, I like to begin by applying a small amount of glue to the center first. Now I'll position the die cut carefully on its shadow layer, making sure it's perfectly centered. Then, working outward, I add tiny amounts of glue section by section. This prevents the die cut from becoming soggy, distorted, or misaligned. The result is a perfectly centered, pristine die cut. Now let's talk about finishing fussy cut elements, which leave stark white edges that detract from the finished look. To fix that problem, I like to use my small ink pads and gently swipe ink along the edges. I'll use the pattern paper layout I created earlier to show you what I mean. I choose ink colors that closely match the image. This simple step makes the piece look far more polished and finished. A little color overlap isn't bad since it adds contrast and interest to the piece. You can do this with die cuts too, and I think it would look fabulous to add ink around the edges. This one is about polishing the edges of shaped cards when the die only cuts a portion of the card front. Let me create the shaped edge first, and for that I'll open the card base up and lay it down flat so I can tape the die in place, because I only want the front panel as a shaped edge. I'll make sure the die is centered and pretty straight. Next, I'll position the cutting plate so it only covers the area I want cut. I apologize, I didn't realize I was out of frame when positioning the plate. Also note that I rolled the sandwich back in the die cutting machine instead of running it through all the way. That's because I don't want the card base to get scratched up by the plates. Now I'll detach the remaining section using my wire trimmer. You can definitely use scissors here, but you know I'm challenged in that department and I can't cut straight. I've moved the blade out of the way and I'm going to line up these 2 points using the wire guide. Once everything is lined up, I'll only cut up to this point. I can feel when I reach the end of the cutting line. Again, I'll adjust the wire guide to make sure I'm perfectly aligned with the cut line. Oops, I did cut a little bit too much there. You can see it went in just slightly further than intended. I'll add a label to the card front to complete the design so that the cut won't be visible at all, but I can do the same on the inside to disguise it. Now I'll detach this piece here, and I also need to detach this section. I don't want to pull on it because that's how you end up with a frayed corner. There we go, that part is done. As you can see, this edge is clean, but it could still use a little bit of polish. So this is where my scoring board will help. I'll line the panel up with my washi tape marker here and align it with the track, making sure both edges are aligned along the same track. Now I'll score. Just from here up to the label, and I'll score again from this corner. What this does is lightly emboss the edge. I don't know if you can see the raised area on camera, but it actually turns the edge slightly inward, which softens it and gives it a more finished and rounded look. I do still have a slightly sharp edge here, so I'll use my sanding block and gently sand it down just a little to smooth it out. Now I have a beautifully shaped card front and the straight edges look a lot more polished. Now for the final hack. You know how we sometimes wish a particular cardstock or a piece of really thin pattern paper would have a little more gloss or weight? Well, now you can DIY it by adding some clear packing tape. This pattern paper is dull and also really flimsy, but I do like the pattern. So I'll try to get 2 strips of packing tape butted together since the paper is much wider than the tape. Now look at how it's become high gloss with barely any effort. Now I can use this label die to cut out a panel with this high gloss pattern paper. It's that simple. I do see the line where the 2 tapes meet, but it'll be barely visible when I place other elements over it. I'd love to hear which hack was your favorite and which others you'll use soon. Don't forget to give this a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you like this video, you'll love this earlier one with 11 laminator hacks, and you can watch it here.